I'm sure you all have seen the news the last few months, mass shooting after mass shooting in America. I originally wrote the first draft of this episode on February 13th, 2018. The next day, the Parkland shooting occurred. I shelved the case for the time being. The timing didn't seem right. I planned to release this episode on Friday, May 24th. But on May 18th, long after I had finished editing, the shooting in Santa Fe occurred. I came to the very sad realization that there will never be a good time to release any episode that regards such a widely debated and sensitive topic. I'm sticking to this release date in the hopes that those who choose to listen will understand that I am not looking to play off of the tragedy of others. I cover all my topics with the intention of trying to comprehend why crimes occur. I do my best to regard each victim and those affected by said crimes with the utmost respect. Something that I hope is conveyed in all of the episodes of The Apex and The Abyss. Please be fully aware that the following episode contains graphic descriptions and audio that may be upsetting to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. I've talked about my high school experience before. It was nothing to write home about, honestly. I look back on it as an enjoyable time, but it wasn't the highlight of my life. Not like it is for some people. You know who I'm talking about. The people who seem to never actually leave high school, even decades after the fact. Despite the normal doldrums and annoyances of school, I did have a good time during my 4 years. The only thing about my school, which is an all-girls high school by the way, is that it's big on camaraderie, school spirit, sisterhood. I love that because I never experienced such unity before. A lot of the time, my high school was actually a safe haven for me, especially on days when I didn't want to go home and face the tensions there. Honestly, school should be a safe haven for everybody. It shouldn't just be a place that we feel forced to go to. It's a source of knowledge, friendship, growth, and comfort. Unfortunately, this tune isn't sung by all. Some people hate school for numerous reasons. They could just dislike the fact that they have to wake up early, or the disconnect can stem from something deeper. We have all experienced bullying in some form or another. I believe you would be hard-pressed to find a single person who never felt ostracized for this, that, or another reason. That experience of being left out, or arguably worse, a target, of being a punching bag to someone else, can totally ruin any experience. Now, I have been bullied, but it wasn't a situation that ever affected me so badly that I felt a burning rage inside of me, or that I was unsafe. In fact, there was only one instance that I felt real danger while in high school. It was my sophomore year, second period world history, with one of my favorite teachers, Mr. Murray. He was a hard-ass ex-cop turned teacher who took no crap from anyone. I adored him. Anyway, at some point during the class, the dean of students came over the loudspeaker and said a sentence we were all taught to be code for a lockdown. I won't utter the sentence right now, but every school has a list of phrases to indicate danger of some sort without outwardly saying it. It just sounds like any normal announcement. But this sentence told us that we were not allowed out of our classrooms under any circumstances, at least not until we were given the all clear by the dean. Mr. Murray went over to the 2 doors and locked them and told us to keep it down and remain in our seats. We were all used to these types of drills in some form, fire drills or lockdown drills. All they really did was cut classes short, and that was fine by most of us. But something was different about this one. Mr. Murray's brow was slightly furrowed in curiosity, and he got up once or twice to look out the windows of our doors. And then, in a moment, the situation went from a mock drill to a real-life threat. Outside of the door, I saw not one, but 2 police officers wearing bulletproof vests, and with them were 2 large German shepherds that were sniffing up and down the hallway, hunting for something. Once Mr. Murray saw those dogs, his face dropped, and he told us all to shut up and to not make a sound. His booming voice silenced us all, and there was a real fear in the air. I can't tell you how much time actually passed between the beginning of the drill until the end, but it felt like an eternity. The dean eventually came over the loudspeaker and gave us the all clear to go to our next period. What would later come out is that a handful of upperclassmen had called in a bomb threat to the school, because they didn't want to take a test that day. Well, I'm here to tell you that they didn't have to worry about any tests because if memory served me correctly, they were expelled from the school. The fear in that school was palpable in those moments, but an even more unsettling feeling was the helplessness. This situation is in no way comparable to something that is an actual threat. That reality is unfathomable to me. If that threat was real, we were stuck in that room with no explanation as to why we or anyone else would be a target. This threat was neutralized fast and it turned out to be false. But as we have seen time and time again, the threat can be real, and it can be deadly. You're listening to The Apex and the Abyss, and this is the story of the Columbine High School massacre.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, reporting tonight from Littleton, Colorado.
Good evening. This community is really suffering tonight. It is also bewildered, and it is very much convinced now that if it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. So much has been changed by the shooting at Columbine High School over there, off limits behind the trees. So much innocence lost, as you can see in the messages and flowers put here at the edge of the high school campus. Columbine High, named after the state flower, is now in the annals of American gun violence.
Tuesday, April 20th, 1999. Littleton, Colorado. It was a beautiful day, an ordinary Tuesday, especially ordinary for the students at Columbine High School. The end of the school year was fast approaching. The previous Saturday, the senior students went to prom, and in a few weeks' time they would be donning on caps and gowns to celebrate graduation. I wish I could tell you that this day stayed ordinary. I wish I could tell you that every student who walked the halls to their classes went to sleep peacefully in their homes that evening. I really wish I could tell you that this day remained ordinary. Around 11 a.m., two Columbine seniors named Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris entered the Columbine High School parking lot. They parked about 100 yards away from one another, not in their designated spots. Somewhere between 11:19 a.m., these two boys began to open fire on their fellow students at Columbine High School. By noon, the pair had murdered 13 people and injured an additional 24 individuals. At 12:08 p.m., the duo entered the school library after walking the halls, throwing handmade bombs, and spraying bullets through the walls. This is where two final shots rang out. Eric and Dylan had committed suicide, putting an end to the massacre. But to this day, 19 years later, there is no end to the ever-mounting question. Why? What drove these young men to inflict such harm on their school? Were there warning signs? To try and even understand how this tragedy occurred, we need to go back to the beginning. In Lakewood, Colorado on September 11, 1981, Thomas and Susan Klebold welcomed their second son, Dylan Bennett Klebold, into the world. A few years earlier, they had their first son, Byron. The Klebolds would describe Dylan as quiet and shy, but he was equipped with a brilliant mind. He would be enrolled into a gifted children's program at a young age, which according to his mother may have aided in his shyness, especially when it came to transitioning into a regular middle school. The school for the gifted sheltered the already sensitive youngster. Despite his timidness, Dylan was an active child. He played sports and was in a Cub Scout troop with one of his best friends since first grade, Brooks Brown. At some point, towards the last few years of 7th or 8th grade, Dylan became friends with a new kid at Ken Carl Middle School. This boy was named Eric Harris. Eric David Harris was born on April 9, 1981, in Wichita, Kansas. He was also the second-born son in his family. He had an older brother named Kevin, who was about the same age as Dylan's older brother. The Harris family moved from place to place quite often. Wayne Harris, Eric's father, was a transport pilot for the U.S. Air Force, requiring him to transfer from base to base whenever his position needed him to. In the early 90s, Wayne retired from the Air Force and took his family back to his home state of Colorado to finally settle down in one place. By 1995, Dylan and Eric were close friends who spent a great deal of time together. This was the same year that the pair entered Columbine High School as well. Somewhere in between middle school and entering high school, Brooks Brown and Dylan were not as close as they once were. They attended different middle schools, and as it goes, they drifted apart. But they did become friendly again once all three young men entered Columbine High together. Dylan and Eric were typical high school boys. They were involved in extracurricular activities, and they both maintained good grades. The pair also loved playing a video game called Doom, which is a first-person shooter game where the main character, Doom Guy, shoots demons from hell throughout various levels. Eric loved the game so much that he made a website online to host levels that he created for the game. They would later be dubbed the Harris levels. Eric expanded on this website and used it as his own personal blog as well. Within this digital journal is everything you would expect from a hormone-raging teenage boy. His thoughts about school, his friends, his parents, and even his enemies. As time went on, and Eric's frustrations with the world around him grew, the narrative of his blog began to shift. You could read his anger with every line. You could see this growing hate for mankind. His blog would begin to detail all the things that would send Eric over the edge into rage. He would even write instructions on how to make explosives and how to cause trouble to the handful of people who actually knew of this blog's existence, presumably doing all of this without getting caught. Dylan had outlets as well. However, his words would not be seen until it was far too late. He would write in journals often, especially after an incident in his junior year. While you could sense his growing anger as he wrote, it wasn't as palpable as Eric's. In fact, Dylan would write more about girls he pined over, his sadness, and even his suicidal thoughts. According to the students at Columbine, bullying was a brutal problem within the school that wasn't handled as appropriately as it should have been. Stories would later come out about Eric and Dylan being greatly disliked by some of their classmates, though the extent of that dislike varies depending on who you talk to. Some people would state that they were well liked by their selected group of friends, while others would call them outcast, or the quote, losers of the losers. Either way, fellow students would come forward and tell stories about how they were physically slammed into lockers, ketchup packets would be squirted on them in the lunchroom under teacher observation, and then they were forced to walk around the rest of the school day with soiled clothes. Or in one instance, a cup of fecal matter was thrown at Eric and Dylan. Finally, people would come forward and state that Eric especially was bullied because of his small stature. He would be mocked frequently because of a defect he had on his chest. He was born with an indent on his chest cavity, and while he did get 2 surgeries to help correct it, he was still self-conscious about it, to the point where he wouldn't undress in the locker room like the other boys for gym. It was rumored he would wear layers of clothes to avoid the defect being seen. The stories about what Eric and Dylan were subjected to at Columbine could go on and on. Many students were targets for bullies at the school. It wasn't just Dylan and Eric. They just seemed to deal with their pent-up rage in regards to it differently than others. Instead of just letting it happen, or telling a parent or teacher, they began to plot revenge. Despite their plotting, at school Eric and Dylan had a handful of good friends that they associated with. Dylan introduced Eric to his old friend Brooks Brown, and the 3 became fast friends. Brooks, since he lived close to Eric, would often drive him to school. Brooks was late a lot picking Eric up, which drove Eric insane. He wanted to be on time and took the responsibilities of school very seriously. Due to an argument between the two, subsequently causing the pair to sever their friendship, Eric began taking the bus to Columbine, a mode of transportation he despised. Eric and Brooks would eventually reconcile, but this was kind of their story. They'd be friends one minute, and then have a falling out the next. At some point, Eric was so enraged by Brooks that he wound up throwing a chunk of ice at Brown's car, and he cracked the glass in the window. Somehow, even after that, the pair would mend the friendship again for a short time. But another break would occur, and Brooks would wind up telling Mrs. Harris where Eric hid the alcohol that he would sneak and drink at night. This sent Eric over the edge. He threatened to kill Brooks and his family for the betrayal, but Brooks thought nothing of it. At least until Dylan showed him Eric's website, where he posted a blog ranting about how he wanted to kill Brooks and his whole family. The tone of this blog post was serious, not just a teenage rant of anger because he couldn't steal swigs of booze. Brooks told his parents about this threat, and the Browns reported it to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. A detective wrote up an affidavit with the intent of filing it to get a search warrant for the Harris home, but somehow it was never filed. There is a possibility that if this warrant was filed, Eric's rage would have been revealed to his parents and law enforcement very early on. They would have gone into his room They would have searched the house, and officials would have found that he was collecting a small arsenal of weapons in prep for something far more heinous than an empty threat. In early January of 1998, Eric and Dylan were arrested for breaking into a van and stealing equipment out of it. It was a felony-level theft, and both boys pled guilty to the charges. They were both sentenced to a juvenile diversion program for 12 months, wherein they had to attend anger management courses and interact with a diversion officer. Both Eric and Dylan were released from the diversion program early due to the fact that they showed such great promise within their classes and conversations with the diversion officers. They showed positive attitudes, expressed remorse for their actions, and after this incident, things seemed to return back to normal for the pair. But underneath the surface, the rage that had been building up was growing larger. They just got better at hiding it. Eric would begin to see a psychologist and a psychiatrist after it was revealed that he had depression and suicidal thoughts. He would continue these counseling sessions until right before the tragedy at Columbine occurred. Harris would even be prescribed Zoloft, which is an antidepressant. This prescription didn't work well for him, so he was then switched over to another medication called Luvox. Roughly a year to 18 months leading up to April 20th, Eric and Dylan were plotting an attack on their school. They had begun obtaining firearms through friends. At this time, Eric and Dylan were both underage. They would need someone who was 18 or older to purchase a gun. 3 friends in particular, Robin Anderson, Philip Duran, and Mark Maines all assisted with the purchase of firearms and ammunition that were used in the attack. They didn't realize that at the time the pair intended on harming anyone with these weapons. They just believed that the duo were gun enthusiasts. Eric and Dylan would go into the woods often with their few friends and shoot guns at bowling pins, other targets, and trees. After the massacre, video footage of the pair practicing their shot would be released to the media. Eric and Dylan had chosen an official date for their attack, so with the time leading up to it, they began observing the habits of the students at the school, taking notes, and collecting as many weapons as they could. They would use information they found on the internet to learn how to saw the butts and barrels off of their shotguns, which is an illegal firearms practice. It makes the weapons easier to conceal and more lethal. They would also learn from their internet searches how to make explosives. On April 17, 1999, Dylan Klebold and Robin Anderson attended their senior prom. According to witness accounts, Dylan seemed to have a great time at his prom. Nothing seemed out of sorts at all. Looking back at photos, it's hard to imagine that in just 3 days' time, this individual, who's dressed in a tux and has his hair slicked back into a neat ponytail, would walk up to his school with his best friend and open fire. Hindsight is 20/20, as they say. Looking back on days, weeks, months, and even years before the attack occurred, there appeared to be some warning signs. Like previously stated, Eric threatened to kill Brooks Brown and his family. According to friends of the shooters, they would show off their weapons to other individuals often. A close friend to both Harris and Klebold was shown a pipe bomb that Eric had stashed in his basement. Another student came across Eric's webpage and saw her name on what appeared to be a hit list. There are conflicting reports on whether or not this student informed school officials of this threat. The student claims that she spoke to the assistant principal about it. However, the administration at the school denies this meeting ever took place. There was also a video that Klebold and Harris made called Hitmen for Hire. In it, the two are wearing black trench coats and brandishing fake weapons. But what kept people from looking into these two individuals deeper? Yes, they did have a run-in with the law. The pair also maintained relatively good grades. They did have friends, and they were somewhat making plans for the future. All signs of a fairly well-adjusted individual, especially if you scratch off that one run-in with the law. Dylan had been accepted to a few colleges and settled on attending one in Arizona, something he spoke about during the prom. He said he looked forward to going to college. He liked the atmosphere, and he seemed excited for the future. It is even claimed that at a dinner before the group of students went to the prom, that Dylan spoke of keeping in touch with one of his friends. Eric, on the other hand, was frustrating his parents when it came to his future. He didn't want to go to college or put that type of effort forward, maybe due to the fact that he had it already set in his mind that his life was ending on April 20th. To appease his parents, though, especially his father, Eric had met with Marine recruits, though he was denied entry a few days before the massacre took place, allegedly due to the fact that he was on antidepressants. It is not certain whether or not Eric was aware of this rejection before the shooting occurred. Whatever pain these two were feeling, no one truly noticed how bad it was. No parent looks at their child and raises them to be a mass murderer, which is a fact I think people tend to forget.
Sometimes teen behaviors, such as sullenness, maybe differing sleep patterns, maybe they sleep too much or too little, these can all be perceived as normal teen behaviors. Dylan did get into trouble in his junior year of high school, and he stole something. He got in trouble at school. He scratched a locker. Those were indicators that something might be wrong. But at that time, I was not aware that those could be indicators of depression or possibly some kind of brain health issue. But what did happen after that was he promised us that he would get his life on track, and he did. He had a full 14 months after that, from that moment until the tragedy, where he was doing all the things a healthy person would do. He was going to school, he held a job, he had applied at 4 colleges. Just the weekend before the tragedy, he picked out his dorm room for college, and he went to a prom with 12 of his friends, came home and told me he'd had the best time of his life. These are not behaviors that one would expect of someone who is preparing to die or to kill. Knowing Dylan and knowing the kind of person he was, those of us who loved him and knew him didn't believe he was capable of intentionally harming people or killing people.
April 20th, 1999. An elaborate plan was supposed to take place. In Eric and Dylan's perfect world, this is what they hoped would have happened that Tuesday morning, according to the journals that were found after the attack. The pair broke it down into 3 acts. Act 1. The two wanted to cause a diversion away from the school, so they first intended on planning a large explosion in a field about 3 miles away from the high school, hoping that this would draw police and fire away from the beginning of their attack. They set this bomb to go off at 11:14 a.m. The next part of the plan was to cause a devastating explosion in the commons, which is what the students called the school cafeteria. For weeks, the pair observed what would be the best time to detonate a large explosive device in that room. They determined that it would be during lunch A. At the busiest of times, about 600 students would be walking through this area, grabbing food, and meeting up with their peers. Eric and Dylan were going to go to the school, without being noticed, and plant 2 propane bombs in duffel bags filled with nails, BBs, and other items at 2 separate locations in the cafeteria. These bombs were placed next to pillars, in the hopes that it would cause the second floor to come crashing down into the cafeteria. The school library was just above the commons. Once the cafeteria bombs were placed, they both planned to go back to their cars, which were parked about 100 yards away from one another, and prepare for Act 2. The propane bombs were set to detonate at 11:17 a.m. While the clocks were ticking down, the pair were to put on their trench coats to conceal their weapons they had on them, set the detonators in their car bombs, and to patiently wait for the cafeteria to explode. Once that occurred, they were going to start shooting the surviving students who would no doubt be running for their lives as they came out of the school exits. Dylan had a Tech DC-9, which is a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, and he had a shotgun. Eric was equipped with a 9mm carbine rifle and a shotgun. They both had knives, Molotov cocktails, and close to 80 pipe bombs, some of which had Vodka's Vengeance written on them in black Sharpie. Vodka was Dylan's nickname. Eric went by Reb, short for Rebel, which is the Columbine High School mascot, the Columbine Rebels. Act 3 was something the pair never expected to survive long enough to see, but they wanted one final act of vengeance. They knew if everything went according to plan, police and fire would be at the school fairly quickly. They would either be dead by their own hand or due to a gunfight with police. Act 3 is where the car bombs came in. They had this attack planned down to the minute. They set timers on their car bombs for about 45 minutes after they expected to be done shooting their peers and teachers. They expected paramedics, law enforcement, and survivors to set up shop in the parking lot. And then, boom. Another massive explosion killing anyone in the radius of their vehicles. Their hope was to outdo Timothy McVeigh, the infamous Oklahoma City bomber. Timothy killed 168 people and injured somewhere around 700 people by planting a truck bomb in front of a federal building in downtown Oklahoma City on April 19, 1995. Eric and Dylan believed if they played their cards right, they could kill well over 168 people. Perhaps the whole student body even. But even the best laid plans can go wrong. This is what actually happened on the morning of April 20th, 1999. Both Eric and Dylan had a 6 a.m. bowling class, and despite what you may have heard in documentaries or via news outlets, the pair skipped this class. Some reports say that a student who was in the class with the duo saw them in the parking lot that morning, but they never showed up to the actual class. Sue Klebold, Dylan's mother, remembers hearing her son yell out "bye" as he left that morning. She would never think in a million years that this would be the last time she would hear her son's voice, a boy she referred to as her golden boy. Dylan, donning a shirt that said "Wrath" in red bold letters, met up with Eric in the early morning hours of April 20th. It is unclear exactly what they did or where they went leading up to the attacks. By 7:56 a.m., Eric is spotted at a gas station buying the propane tanks needed for the bombs. He is wearing dark sunglasses, a flannel button-down, and a white t-shirt underneath, a shirt that reads "Natural Selection." The next time the pair are possibly accounted for might be around 10:58 a.m. This is an unconfirmed sighting, but via the school cafeteria cameras, 2 individuals walk into the school with what appear to be 2 black duffel bags, and then they are seen exiting without them. Due to the grainy footage, it is hard to tell if this is actually Eric and Dylan planting the propane bombs, but it is possible. No one in the cafeteria noticed them come in or out. But if they are the outcasts like they claim to be, it is possible that they could have slipped in and out of the cafeteria quickly without being noticed at all. It is believed that the pair went to a nearby park and armed up after this, put on their black trench coats, and drove back to the school and parked in their predetermined spots. Eric and Dylan had skipped all their morning classes, something that was very unusual for them. They were known to skip a period or two together, but not an entire morning. Especially Eric, who was very high-strung when it came to his grades and his class attendance. Eric had a test that day in his 3rd period, something Brooks Brown, who was in that 3rd period, noticed was extremely odd for Eric to miss. This was an important test in the class. Allegedly, a large portion of their grade depended on this test, but Eric was a no-show. At around 11:10 that morning, Brooks walked out of the school to have a cigarette when he noticed Eric at his car, dressed in a long black trench coat. The pair recently put their drawn-out squabbles aside and were civil to one another, but Brown was annoyed at Eric for ditching class, so he decided to go up to him and let him have it. Like friends do. When Brooks confronted Eric about missing the class and the test, Eric simply said, "It doesn't matter anymore. Brooks, I like you now. Get out of here. Go home." Brooks truly didn't understand the gravity of those words until, well, a few minutes later. He decided to walk across the parking lot and distance himself from the school and Eric. He is said to have been seen walking in the direction of his home by witnesses. The propane bombs were set to go off at 11:17 a.m. This time frame was when the lunchroom was at its peak capacity, according to their notes. As previously stated, the Commons had surveillance cameras, but unfortunately the tape that was recording had been changed, and school officials as well as law enforcement say that the bomb placement was never captured. The sighting I spoke of earlier is pure speculation. What is known is that the tape was switched and wasn't set to record again until 11:22 a.m. The 11:17 a.m. detonation time came and went, and nothing happened. Around the same time, a phone call came into the Jefferson County Police Station stating that an explosion was heard going off in a field. This was the decoy bomb, but it only partially detonated, and the minor grass fire it caused was easily put out. After realizing that the bombs in the cafeteria had failed, the pair set up the bombs that they had in their vehicles and took their arsenal of weapons and headed towards the west entrance of the school. Eric and Dylan came upon Richard Castaldo and Rachel Scott, who were sitting outside on the grass by the west entrance. Eric and Dylan started shooting. Richard was struck by 8 bullets and managed to survive his wounds. However, he would be paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of his life. Rachel was hit 4 times and died from a gunshot wound to the head. At this commotion, Brooks, who had been walking away from the school, heard the shots and started hustling towards a home by the school to call the police. The students and teachers in the cafeteria can be seen on the surveillance cameras peering out the window, wondering what was going on. They clearly had heard something. But perhaps it was the seniors playing a prank, setting off fireworks or cherry bombs, but it was nothing of the sort. Stripping off the heavy coat, Eric began reloading his weapon. student Lance Kirkland came out to smoke, accompanied by his friend Danny and Sean. Eric and Dylan saw the trio and began opening fire on the young men. Lance was hit in the leg and chest, but would later be shot at close range in the face. He would miraculously survive, but the left side of his jaw was severely damaged. Danny was shot in the chest, and the force of the bullet threw him into Sean, who began to run. Later, when Dylan was walking past Danny's body, he shot him again at close range, killing him. As he ran, Sean would be hit multiple times in the back and abdomen, and he would eventually fall to the ground once he was struck in the leg by a bullet. He attempted to crawl for cover, but his injuries greatly weakened him. He collapsed in front of the entrance to the school cafeteria. He would lay down and play dead in the hopes that he would not be shot again. Other students who were sitting outside enjoying the beautiful weather began to hear the screams and gunfire. The students who were outside began to run for their lives once they realized that they were in danger. While this was occurring, it has been stated that the witnesses heard one of the shooters yell, "This is what we've always wanted to do. This is awesome." The chaos of the situation was spreading quickly as more and more people realized that this was not a joke. Teachers and students in the school began peering out the windows, where they saw Eric and Dylan shooting at students who were fleeing and ducking down. All this transpired within the first 5 minutes of the massacre. By 11:23 a.m., a 911 call was placed from a student at Columbine stating that someone had a gun and was shooting. Around the same time, Coach Dave Sanders and 2 custodians at the school came into the cafeteria. Realizing what was going on and hearing a student screaming that someone was shooting, the men knew that they needed to get people to safety. Sanders attempted to curb the panic and the stampede of students rushing out of the cafeteria. He ran to the top of the stairs and began directing the students out towards the east side of the school, the opposite direction of the shooters. Patty Nielsen, a part-time teacher at the school, was monitoring the hallways and had noticed Eric and Dylan outside along with another student. She believed that they were holding toy guns of some sort for a video production class, or like many others at first, she thought it was a rowdy prank. She intended on telling them to cut it out because she deemed it inappropriate, but she never even got the chance to walk outside before she realized that this wasn't a prank at all. Eric, noticing the teacher and the student on the other side of a glass door, smiled before pointing the gun at them and firing. Patty and the student were sprayed with glass, metal, and bullets. Patty was hit in the shoulder and the student beside her was hit in the chest with an array of fragments. They both quickly ran into the library to take cover. Deputy Gardner was the first on the scene and saw the pair at the west entrance. He began to fire at them, and there was a short gunfight between him and Eric. This is when the shooters began to take the attack inside the school. This was around 11:25 a.m. Patty Nielsen, who had just been shot, went over to a desk within the library and placed a call to 911.
Jefferson County 911.
Yes, I'm a teacher at Columbine High School. There is a student here with a gun. He has shot out a window. I believe one student.
I've been Columbine High School.
I don't know what's in my shoulder. If it was just harassing me through it.
Okay, has anybody been injured, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And the school is in a panic. And I'm in the library. I've got students down under the tables, kids. Heads under the tables. Kids are screaming. Some of the teachers are, trying to take control of things. We need police here.
Okay, we're getting them there.
Police here.
Who is the student, ma'am?
I do not know who the student is.
Okay.
I saw a student outside. I was in hall duty. Oh, God. Okay. I was on hall duty. I saw a gun. I said, "What's going on out there?" And he said, "Oh, it's probably for video production. It's probably a joke." I said, "Well, I don't think that's a good idea." And I went walking outside. I could see what was going on. He turned the gun straight at us and shot. And my God, the window went out. And the kid standing there with me, I think he got hit.
Okay.
Something in my shoulder.
Okay. We've got help on the way, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, God.
Stay in the line with me.
Oh, God. Hey, kids, just stay down.
Do we know where he's at?
I'm sorry?
Do we know where he's at?
Okay. I'm in the library. He's upstairs. He's right outside of here.
He's outside?
He's outside of this hall.
Outside of the hall or outside?
This hall. Of the
Okay.
library. There are alarms and things going off now. Smoke. My God, smoke is like coming into this room.
Okay.
I've got the kids under the table here. I don't know what's happening in the rest of the building. There's also like smoke in the building. I don't know. I'm sure someone has to be calling 911 besides
Yes,
you.
we've got a lot of people on. Okay. I just want you to stay in the line with me. We need to know what's going on.
Okay.
Okay?
I am on the floor.
Okay. And you've got the kids
in the
there?
library. And I've got every student in this library on the floor. You better stay on the floor.
Is there any way you can lock the doors?
Smoke is coming in from out there, and I'm a little bit. The gun is right outside the library door, okay? I don't think I'm going to go out there.
Okay, you're at Columbine High
11:26, Deputy Gardner began radioing dispatch for backup. Inside the school, Dylan and Eric were running through the halls chasing students and attempting to gun down as many people as possible. Coach Sanders had evacuated the cafeteria as best as he could at this point, and he headed up the stairs to continue helping teachers and students. Once in the hallway, he came face to face with the shooters. Coach Sanders attempted to turn and flee, but Eric shot him in the neck before he could round the corner of the hallway. Injured but alive, Coach Sanders waited until Dylan and Eric disappeared from view when he began to crawl. Richard Long, a fellow teacher, helped Coach Sanders into a nearby classroom and ran to get assistance. He was able to find a few students to help keep the coach calm and administer first aid.
Shots in the building. I need somebody in the south lot with me.
MC2 is in the area. 149-1126.
Headquarters, several shots, code 33.
Additional units from 71, several shots fired, Columbine High School. Use caution.
Got a couple shots off of the shooter on the southeast and southwest, I'm sorry.
In the southwest or southeast?
Southwest. It's a big gun.
Southwest side with a large weapon.
By this point, Eric and Dylan were just outside of the library. They continued shooting and throwing pipe bombs down the halls. Smoke began to pour into the hallways and classrooms. Patty Nielsen was still on the phone with 911 when the smoke alarms and the gunfire was happening just outside the library doors. At 11:29 a.m., Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris entered the library. If you listen closely in Patty Nielsen's 911 call, you can hear one of them screaming, "Get up!" Others have speculated that within this audio you can hear them saying other things as well as cheering as they fired their weapons, but we can only truly rely on eyewitness accounts of what they said.
Okay. We've got help on the way, ma'am.
Okay. Oh, God. Right outside the library door. Okay? I don't think I'm going to go out there. Okay? I've got the kids on the floor. I got all the kids in the library. I can't believe he's not out of bullets. He just keeps shooting and shooting and shooting.
Okay. Yeah, we've got
floor. Yeah. Everyone's up. Okay. Everyone stay on the floor. Stay on the floor. Stay under the table. I'll hold it. Oh, God. It's not,
What's your name, ma'am?
My name is Patty.
Patty?
Yelling everybody get up right now. Please go to the library. Please scream everybody get up right now.
Okay.
Please enter. I have him in the library shooting at students. The lady that I have in the library on the phone.
Okay, try and keep as many people down as we can. Okay. Do you know who he is? Okay.
According to the students in the library, when the pair first entered, they said, "All jocks stand up. White baseball caps. Stand up." Which, at Columbine High School, was a trend that the jocks and popular kids followed. You wore a white baseball cap if you were one of those too. When no one stood up, one of the shooters yelled something along the lines of, "Fine, I'll just shoot anyway." And that's exactly what they both did. Stalking through the library, Dylan came upon Kyle Velasquez. Dylan took his shotgun, aimed it at the back of Kyle's head, and fired, killing him instantly, all because Kyle didn't get under the table fast enough. Both Dylan and Eric moved towards the windows on the west side of the library and began firing at police that were stationed in the parking lot assisting students who were running out of the school. Failing to hit anyone outside, Eric and Dylan turned their guns back to the students in the library. Eric shot at tables, injuring many and killing Steve Curnow. Then he noticed two girls hiding under a table. He allegedly smacked his hand down on the table a few times, bent down, and said, "Peekaboo," before shooting and killing Cassie Bernal. The kickback from the shotgun was so strong that the butt of the gun hit Eric in the face, breaking his nose. A student by the name of Patrick Ireland was hiding in the library and was among the carnage. He bravely moved from his hiding spot to help administer first aid to another student. Dylan saw the top of his head peering out from the table and shot him twice. 2 bullets struck his head and 1 entered his foot. Miraculously, he survived the wounds to his head, and Patrick Ireland was infamously filmed climbing out of the broken library window hours after the attack took place. Eric and Dylan would converse with a few students while firing rounds off into the library. Recounts her conversation with Eric Harris.
I was all sitting there in the library, and then they just started, all you hear is like firecrackers, and then I looked out the window, and there's a kid with a trench coat and a shotgun throwing pipe bombs in the parking lot, and then he shot a girl outside, and then he came into the cafeteria, and you could hear like bombs and shotguns going off, and then he came into the library and shot everybody around me. Then put a gun to my head and asked if we all wanted to die, and he was going to kill us if we were of color, and if we had a hat, and if we played sports.
At another part of the library, Dylan found 3 boys hiding: Matthew Ketchter, Isaiah Scholes, and Craig Scott. Craig was the younger brother of Rachel Scott, the first casualty of the massacre. At some point, Eric made his way over to the same set of tables with Dylan. His face was covered with blood from his broken nose. Dylan attempted to pull Isaiah out from under the table, but was unable to. So Eric crouched down and fatally shot Isaiah. Dylan, taking Eric's lead, shot under the table as well and killed Matthew Ketchter. But the shooters left Craig under the table, possibly believing that they had killed him too. What they didn't realize is that Craig was alive and uninjured. He laid there motionless in a pool of blood that wasn't his own. Eric and Dylan continued to walk through the library, exclaiming, cursing, and excitedly shooting their guns off to instill fear in the surviving teachers and students that were in the room. By 11:34 a.m., Eric and Dylan needed to reload their weapons after rampaging through the library. They had been in there less than 20 minutes. But for those still alive in the room, whether they were injured or not, it must have felt like hours. During their reload, Eric noticed a lone student cowering underneath a table. It was a boy by the name of John Savage. Dylan knew him as an acquaintance, and John stated his name in the hopes that he wouldn't shoot him. He said, "Dylan, what are you doing?" To which Dylan replied, "Oh, just killing people." John asked if they were going to kill him too, and Dylan told him to get out of the library. John ran out at this command. As this interaction was going on, Eric continued firing his weapon at helpless students, killing and injuring more people in his wake. Eventually, the pair reconvened, and they decided to leave the library to inspect the other parts of the school. This was around 11:36 a.m. By 11:44 a.m., after walking down a few hallways, looking into classrooms and deciding their next move, Dylan and Eric went back into the cafeteria. Despite the fact that the shooters were out of the cafeteria for a decent amount of time, there were still a few students hiding in there, possibly paralyzed by fear. Eric attempted to shoot the bag that contained his propane bomb in an attempt to make it go off, but that didn't work. One of the students still in the cafeteria heard one of them say, "Today the world's going to come to an end. Today's the day we die." Eric and Dylan can be seen walking through the cafeteria, stopping to take a sip of water from cups and bottles left behind by terrified students. Eventually, Dylan would toss a bomb aimlessly at the tables, and you can see flames and smoke. During some point in the footage from the cafeteria, they seemed directionless. All that planning, all that hopeful carnage, and not one of the bombs had gone off. One can only imagine what they were saying to one another during that few-minute break in the cafeteria. Eventually, they were able to partially detonate one of the bombs, but not much came out of it. They would leave the commons and meander the hallways for a few minutes more, aimlessly firing their weapons, tossing Molotov cocktails and pipe bombs in random locations, but the sprinkler system in the cafeteria had put out the fire they had started with the bomb. At this point, what was there left to do? At 12:02 p.m., the shooters re-entered the library once again. They returned to the west side windows and exchanged fire with law enforcement for a few minutes. At 12:08 p.m., 2 shots rang out. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, after terrorizing their school for 49 minutes. had committed suicide. Police had been on the scene for a long time, but no officer entered the building while the massacre was occurring. SWAT teams had been stationed outside of the school and didn't enter the building until a little after 1 p.m. that afternoon. About an hour after the last shot was heard. The teams moved from room to room, evacuating people who were hiding. Despite the fact that people had called police saying that there were only 2 shooters and who they were, law enforcement still were unsure of what they were dealing with. Later they would find out that the shooters had been dead for over an hour by the time the first pair of boots entered that school. Helicopters were hovering above, and they called in a sign that was hanging in one of the windows. It read, "1 bleeding to death," but it was misread as, "I am bleeding to death." This sign was written in regards to Coach Sanders. His injuries were severe, and he was bleeding to death in the science lab. He needed to be evacuated and soon, but the room he was in wasn't reached until around 3 p.m. He died before he even made it out on a gurney. By 4:30 p.m. on April 20th, 1999, Columbine High School was finally declared safe. The hallways were riddled with bullet holes, broken glass, blood splatter, and bodies lay strewn about the floors, but still, it was determined that it was, quote-unquote, safe. It was misreported at first as 25 people had died in the shooting, but later corrected to an accurate number. 12 students and 1 teacher had been murdered, and the 2 assailants had committed suicide.
Did make entry into the library. It was a pretty gruesome sight.
The carnage was so great, the scenes so disturbing. The president went on national television tonight and promised to combat the epidemic of school violence.
That we must do more to reach out to our children and teach them to express their anger and to resolve their conflicts with words, not weapons. And we do know we have to do more to recognize the early warning signs that are sent before children act violently.
Handmade crosses were put up representing each person that lost their lives in the Columbine massacre. There were even 2 crosses for Eric and Dylan. Some people felt that they were victims in all of this as well. They committed this heinous act because they were bullied. A father of one of the victims strongly disagreed and cut down their memorials. Funerals were held for all those who lost their lives, except Eric Harris. Dylan had a private ceremony and his body was cremated. Only 15 people were at his funeral. The Klebold family felt as though if they were to give him a proper headstone, that it would be defaced by angry families and victims, so the Klebolds decided to keep their son's ashes. What happened to Eric Harris's remains is unknown. It would later come to light just how isolated Dylan and Eric felt when it came to their place in the world. It can be argued, though, that Eric was the true mastermind of the massacre and that Dylan was just a follower. People who were present as the shooting was going on would state that the 2 handled the situation drastically differently. Eric was out for blood, where Dylan let opportunities to strike pass him by often. He boasted how he wanted to be there, how he wanted to exact revenge. But did he really? Sue Klebold would come forward years later and state that the son that she saw plastered all over the news was not the son that she knew. The Harris family have never made any public statements apart from condolences to the families of the victims soon after the massacre. Besides the shooters, who is to blame in these situations? Both families obtained lawyers soon after the massacre occurred. They knew they would need them. The Klebold's attorney stated to them, "Dylan is not around for them to hate anymore, but you are." And it is true. A lot of anger was projected onto the parents and friends of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. But what could any of them have done? Could the parents have been more attentive? Probably. Should they have searched their son's rooms top to bottom every day? I would not expect them to. That seems like an unrealistic expectation. Would it really be unheard of to see a teenager begin to act withdrawn or out of character? Not really. So when your child is planning a future and bringing home good grades, what is a parent to think? Most likely that everything is fine, even when it isn't. I don't think it would be possible to ever truly understand why Eric and Dylan committed these acts. There is so much evidence that the public will never see because it was allegedly destroyed. After the pair committed the murders and a search was conducted within their homes, their handwritten journals and videotapes, which would later be dubbed the basement tapes, were found. These tapes have been transcribed, but allegedly they have been destroyed so no one else can see them and try to idolize them or repeat what Eric and Dylan had done. Dylan was quoted on a videotape saying, "You've been giving us shit for years. You're fucking gonna pay for all this shit. We don't give a shit, 'cause we're gonna die doing it." It was the very last tape, which was recorded on the morning of the attack. The pair bids farewell to their friends and family, asking those who would be inevitably watching the tapes and going through all of their things to not blame anyone but them. They would explain why they were shooting up the school. There are theories out there that there is more information behind their motives on these tapes than what was released to the public. But again, we'll never know. What we do know is that Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were deeply troubled individuals who felt like they were not seen or heard. It appears that they wanted to do something so notorious that no one would ever forget their names.
What do you think happened to your friend Dylan?
He's a follower. He just got taken into Eric because Eric helped him get attention. Dylan and Eric were never liked by anyone.
And Dylan's parents are going through a terrible time.
Yeah, I've just been watching a lot of the news shows, and I know that they've been putting them off as kind of like these horrible parents. What did they do to make their kid turn out like this? And they didn't do anything. I mean, they were nice people. I mean, I've known Dylan since I was 5.
Dylan went to the prom on Saturday night.
Yeah.
Nothing unusual happened.
No, they had a great time. My friend went with them. My friend doubled with Dylan and his date, and they had a great time. There's nothing. You could not have seen this coming a million years away.
Are you going to be okay?
Probably not. I know I'm not going to be able to go back to Columbine. Ever. 2 of my really good friends shot and killed people there. And I have another couple of friends that are on the missing list. I have a number of friends who are in hospitals right now in surgery. I'm never going to be able to go back there.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Apex and the Abyss. If you want to chat, feel free to reach out on Twitter, Instagram, or send me an email at apexandabyss@gmail.com. You can support the show in many ways. You can head on over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the show. You can become a monthly donor on Patreon, or you can purchase some show merchandise. All the links will be posted in the show notes. Have a great week, everyone. Until next time.
Many of us have suicidal thoughts at some point, but persistent, ongoing thoughts of suicide and devising a means to die are symptoms of pathology. And like many illnesses, the condition has to be recognized and treated before a life is lost. But my son's death was not purely a suicide. It involved mass murder. I wanted to know how his suicidal thinking became homicidal. But research is sparse and there are no simple answers. Yes, he probably had ongoing depression. He had a personality that was perfectionistic and self-reliant, and that made him less likely to seek help from others. He had experienced triggering events at the school that left him feeling debased and humiliated and mad. And he had a complicated friendship with a boy who shared his feelings of rage and alienation and who was seriously disturbed, controlling, and homicidal. And on top of this period in his life of extreme vulnerability and fragility, Dylan found access to guns, even though we'd never owned any in our home. It was appallingly easy for a 17-year-old boy to buy guns, both legally and illegally, without my permission or knowledge. And somehow, 17 years and many school shootings later, it's still appallingly easy. What Dylan did that day broke my heart. When I look back on all that had happened, I could see that my son's spiral into dysfunction probably occurred over a period of about 2 years. Plenty of time to get him help. If only someone had known that he needed help and known what to do. Every time someone asks me, "How could you not have known?" it feels like a punch in the gut. It carries accusation and taps into my feelings of guilt that no matter how much therapy I've had, I will never fully eradicate. But here's something I've learned. If love were enough to stop someone who was suicidal from hurting themselves, suicides would hardly ever happen. But love is not enough, and suicide is prevalent. It's the second leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 34. And 15% of American youth report having made a suicide plan in the last year. I've learned that no matter how much we want to believe we cannot know or control everything our loved ones think and feel. And the stubborn belief that we are somehow different, that someone we love would never think of hurting themselves or someone else, can cause us to miss what's hidden in plain sight. And if worst-case scenarios do come to pass, we'll have to learn to forgive ourselves for not knowing, or for not asking the right questions, or not finding the right treatment. We should always assume that someone we love may be suffering, regardless of what they say or how they act. We should listen with our whole being, without judgment and without offering solutions. I know that I will live with this tragedy, with these multiple tragedies, for the rest of my life. I know that in the minds of many, what I lost can't compare to what the other families lost. I know my struggle doesn't make theirs any easier. I know there are even some who think, I don't have the right to any pain, but only to a life of permanent penance. In the end, what I know comes down to this. The tragic fact is that even the most vigilant and responsible of us may not be able to help. But for love's sake, we must never stop trying to know the unknowable.